Picture this: a garden at the beginning of the world. Two people who have never known fear, never known shame, never known death. A single tree they have been forbidden to touch, and a warning fixed to it as absolute as any warning has ever been. The day you eat of this, you shall surely die. In the day, not eventually, not someday. That day. Then a voice from the branches tells them the warning is a lie. You shall not surely die. They eat. And they do not die. Not that day, not that year. Adam, the same book tells us, goes on to live 930 years. So read the page exactly as it sits in front of you, with no sermon laid over the top, and a strange fact surfaces. The voice of God issued a warning that did not come true. The serpent made a prediction that did. One of the two voices in that garden told the truth about what would happen when they ate, and it was not the voice you were raised to trust. Now, for the better part of 2,000 years, there was only one acceptable way to handle that contradiction. You explain it away. The death God meant was spiritual death. The serpent was the father of lies, twisting words. The case is closed before it is opened. But there was a group in the first centuries of Christianity who refused to explain it away. They read the same verses you just read, and they came to the opposite conclusion about who was lying in that garden and who was telling the truth. We now call them the Gnostics, and they did not treat Genesis as a comforting origin story. They treated it as a crime scene. In their reading, the serpent was not the deceiver. The serpent was the one being in the garden trying to wake the prisoners up. And the voice that said, "Do not eat," the voice that threatened death, that walked the garden in the cool of the day, hunting for two frightened people hiding in the bushes, was not the supreme God of the universe at all. We'll come back to this. Because if they were right, the most foundational story in Western civilization has the hero and the villain reversed. And someone, very early, worked very hard to make sure you never noticed. This is not one fringe text making a wild claim. It is a pattern, repeated across separate documents, written by different hands, recovered from the same sealed jars at Nag Hammadi in 1945. Three of them matter most here. On the origin of the world, which retells the garden from the side of the powers who built it. The hypostasis of the Archons, the nature or the reality of the rulers, which names the being who issued the command and calls it something other than God. And the testimony of truth, the sharpest of the three, which states the reversal almost without flinching. The serpent was the one who revealed knowledge, and the Creator was the one who wanted humanity kept blind. Three independent texts, one forbidden reading, and beneath all three, the same astonishing figure moving through the story. Not the serpent's master, but the serpent's source. A figure the Gnostics called wisdom, in Greek, Sophia. What they describe, when you lay the three accounts side by side, is not a fairy tale about a talking snake. It reads like a rescue. For weeks now, we have been mapping a single claim, that this world is not quite what it appears to be, that it is something closer to a holding cell, and that there is a way out. We followed the white light trap to the checkpoint at the edge of death, where the Gnostics said the soul is met, processed, and quietly returned to the cycle. We followed the Gospel of Philip into the bridal chamber, the ritual they said could clothe a soul in light and a name the guards cannot read, so that it passes through that checkpoint unseen. The exit, in other words. But you cannot fully understand an escape until you understand the prison, how it was built, who built it, and why. So this time we go all the way back, past the checkpoint, past the rituals, to the very first page of the very first story, the garden, the tree, the serpent, and the command. Because according to the Gnostics, the whole trap begins there. And so, hidden in plain sight on the same page, does the key. This is Weird World Files, where history meets the unexplained. Now, let's begin. Start with the obvious question the orthodox reading never quite answers. If the God of Genesis is all-knowing and all-good, why would he forbid his own children the knowledge of good and evil? Why would knowing the difference between right and wrong be the one thing that could damn them? The Gnostics noticed that the command makes no moral sense, and they drew a conclusion that was, for their time, almost unthinkable. The being who gave that command was not the highest god. It was a lesser power, a craftsman. They called him the Demiurge, literally the maker, and in the fullest versions of the story, recorded in texts like the Apocryphon of John, he has a name, Yaldabaoth, a being born blind, ignorant of anything above himself, utterly convinced that he is the only god there is. The hypostasis of the Archons puts the sentence in his mouth directly. He looks out over the world he has made and declares, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." And the text adds the line that gives the whole game away. In saying this, the rulers, the Archons, did not know that a power above them existed. He was not lying to deceive. He was wrong because he genuinely could not see. A warden who has never once been outside the prison and therefore believes the prison is the entire world. Hold that picture, because the second text sharpens it. On the Origin of the World retells the creation from a vantage point the Bible never offers, the perspective of the powers who built the cage. In that account, the command not to eat is not protection, it is containment. The rulers are afraid. They look at the humans they have shaped from clay and they sense a danger in them. They sense that if these creatures ever taste real knowledge, they will look up, see past the painted ceiling of the world, and recognize their jailers for exactly what they are. The tree is not a trap God sets for humanity. The tree is the one thing the jailers cannot allow humanity to reach, and the serpent in this version is the figure who slips past the guards and points to it anyway. Read that way, the garden is not a paradise with one forbidden rule. It is a prison yard with one unlocked door and a notice nailed beside it warning that anyone who opens it will die. Then comes the third text, and it is the one that does not flinch. The testimony of truth takes the garden apart line by line, almost like a prosecutor building a case. It asks out loud the questions the orthodox reading buries. What kind of God forbids knowledge? What kind of God is jealous of his own creatures for wanting to understand? What kind of God walks through a garden calling out, "Where are you?" as if he genuinely does not know when he is supposed to know everything? The testimony of truth looks at that one detail, the God who has to ask where Adam is hiding, and treats it as a confession. A being that has to search for you is a being with limits. And a being with limits is not the infinite source of all things. It is something smaller, something that can be hidden from, something that can be escaped. 3 texts, 3 separate hands. One conclusion, that the voice in the garden was not the top of the chain of command. It was a middle manager who did not want his staff finding out there was a head office. And the texts do not stop at describing him, they name him. We said the Demiurge declares, "I am God, there is no other." But the Gnostic accounts do not let that boast stand unanswered. In both the Hypostasis of the Archons and on the Origin of the World, the moment he says it, a voice comes down from above him, from the realm he does not know exists, and the voice corrects him. "You are wrong." And then it gives him a name. It calls him Samael. The texts translate it for us. Samael means the god of the blind. Another version calls him Saklas, the fool. So the supreme god of the garden, the one who issued the command, the one whose threat did not come true, is given a name by the powers above him, and the name means blind, and the name means fool, and this is the detail that stopped me cold, because the being is not described as malicious the way a devil is malicious. He is described as something far more familiar and far more frightening, a powerful, frightened, limited authority, utterly convinced of its own supremacy, that has never once looked up to check whether anything stands above it. The Gnostics were not describing Satan. They were describing every blind authority that has ever mistaken the edge of its own vision for the edge of the world. So if the Demiurge is not the true God, where did he come from? And this is where the story stops being an argument and becomes something close to a tragedy. According to the Gnostic accounts, the Demiurge was born. He had a mother. And his mother is the figure at the heart of everything we are tracing here. Her name is Sophia, wisdom. In the Gnostic map of reality, Sophia is one of the great powers of the pleroma, the fullness, the realm of light beyond this world. The texts describe her doing something the others did not. Out of longing, out of a desire to create the way the source creates, she brought forth a being on her own, without her counterpart, before the time was right. And what came out was wrong, malformed, a power with enormous force and no light, no wisdom, no awareness of anything above itself. Ashamed of what she had made, Sophia hid him away in a region of his own, wrapped in a cloud so the others would not see. And there, alone in the dark, cut off from everything higher than himself, that abandoned creature looked around at the emptiness, saw no one above him, and drew the only conclusion he could. I am God. There is no other. Sit with that for a moment. The tyrant of Genesis in this reading is not evil in the way we usually mean it. He is a wound, a mistake that woke up and mistook its own loneliness for supremacy. And everything that follows, the clay bodies, the garden, the command, the threat, is built by a being who does not know he is the broken child of a grieving mother. But here is the cruel irony at the very center of it. When the Demiurge molded the first human out of clay, the figure would not stand. It lay there, inert, lifeless, a body with nothing inside it. So the powers, tricked by a higher voice they could not even hear, breathed into it. And what they breathed in, without the faintest idea what they were doing, was light, a spark, a fragment of the higher world, of Sophia's own substance, that had been carried down inside the Demiurge from the moment he was born. They thought they were animating a servant. What they had actually done was hide a piece of the divine inside the prison, in the one place they would never think to search, inside the prisoner. We have called this the divine spark before, and this is the moment it enters the human story. Every person the Gnostics taught carries a buried fragment of the real, asleep, forgotten, covered over by flesh and fear and forgetting. And from above, Sophia looks down and sees it, recognizes her own light buried in those clay figures. Her children are in there, imprisoned in matter, guarded by her own deformed son, who has no idea what he is holding. She cannot storm the garden. She is not permitted to simply tear the prison open. So she does the only thing she can. She finds a way in. And the rescue, in these texts, does not come the way you would expect. Not as a thunderbolt or an army or a god descending in glory. It comes quietly, through a woman and through a whisper. In the hypostasis of the Archons, the spiritual principle from above enters the garden through the serpent. The serpent is not wisdom's enemy. The serpent is wisdom's instrument, the disguise she wears to slip past the guards, and the message she carries past them is devastatingly simple. The fruit will not kill you. Your jailer lied. Eat, and your eyes will open, and you will see where you really are. The same text takes it further. The spiritual principle enters into Eve, and it is Eve, awakened first, who turns to the sleeping Adam and speaks. The text gives her a startling title, the instructor. She is the one who teaches. And when Adam opens his eyes and truly sees her, he says something the orthodox story flattens into a single dismissive line about a rib. He says, "You are the one who has given me life. You will be called the mother of the living." The Gnostics heard that title, Mother of the Living, the meaning buried inside the name Eve itself, and they did not hear a footnote. They heard the truth leaking through, because the one who carries the spark, the one who instructs, the one who wakes the sleeper and gives him life, is wearing the face of Sophia. Wisdom, working through the serpent. Wisdom, working through Eve. The same rescuing intelligence, slipping into the prison again and again, wearing whatever disguise will get her past the guards. Stop and think about what that would actually mean. The most condemned act in the entire Bible, the original sin, the reason we are told that every human since is born guilty, was, in the Gnostic reading, a mother reaching through the bars of a cell to wake her sleeping children. The serpent was Sophia, and the fruit was the antidote. And every time the orthodox reading sneers at the woman and the snake together, the two great villains of the fall, the Gnostics would say you have it exactly backwards. Those are not the two who damned you. Those are the two who tried to wake you. And notice what the text says happened the instant they ate. The eyes of both of them were opened, not their stomachs turned, not a curse fell out of the sky, their eyes opened. The very first consequence of the forbidden fruit in the book the Church itself preserved is perception, sight where there had been none. And the second thing the text records is stranger still. They realized they were naked and they were ashamed, and they hid. The orthodox reading turns that into the birth of sin and guilt. The Gnostics read it as something closer to shock, the disorientation of a creature that has just woken up inside a body for the first time and understood all at once exactly where it is. Stay with me, because this is the part that lingers. Waking up is not painless. The first gift of real sight is the unbearable awareness of the cell you are standing in, and the powers, watching from outside, did not see two sinners. They saw two prisoners who had just looked directly at the bars. And if you think they had to strain the text to read it this way, look at what happens at the end of the 3rd chapter of Genesis. In the verses, almost no sermon lingers on. The humans have eaten. Their eyes are open. And the God of the garden says something extraordinary. He says, and this is in the text the Church preserved, not in any hidden gospel, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Like one of us, not like a fallen creature, like a god." And then comes the line the Gnostics seized on. "Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life, and eat and live forever." So God drives them out of the garden and posts a guard with a flaming sword, specifically to keep them away from the tree that would make them immortal. Listen to that again. The expulsion was not punishment for a moral failure. The expulsion was containment. The serpent had opened their eyes. They had become like gods in knowledge, and the one thing now standing between them and full divinity was eternal life. And the Creator moved immediately, urgently, to cut off their access to it. The Gnostics did not have to invent a single word of that. It is sitting in the text, in black and white, in the book on the shelf. A God who fears his creatures becoming like him. A God who blocks the road to immortality the moment they take the first step down it. Ask yourself this: does that read like a loving father protecting his children, or like a warden who has just watched two prisoners pick the first lock? So what, exactly, did the serpent hand them? Not an apple. The text never says apple. What the serpent offered was knowledge, and the Greek word the Gnostics built their entire worldview around is gnosis, not information, not facts you could write down and forget. A direct first-hand knowing, the kind that once it arrives you cannot unknow. And this is where this story locks into everything we have traced before it. We have followed the soul trap, the mechanism the Gnostics believed waits at the moment of death, the warm light, the draught of forgetting, the quiet return to the cycle. We have followed the bridal chamber, the ritual they said could make a soul invisible to the powers at the checkpoint, and here, at the very beginning, in the first garden, is the first dose of the same medicine. The serpent's gift was the opening move, the moment a sleeping creature in a clay body was told, for the first time, that it was sleeping, that the world it could see was not the whole of reality, that the voice it had been obeying was not the highest voice. Everything else the Gnostics taught, the gates, the names, the garment of light, the escape from the cycle, begins with that single act of waking. The serpent did not corrupt humanity. According to these texts, the serpent switched the lights on, and once the lights are on in a single room of the prison, the warden has a problem he can never fully solve again. Now, you might be thinking that this is just an old heresy, a strange minority reading that lost, the way most strange readings lose and faded quietly into the sand. But that is not what happened, Because if this reading were harmless, the early church would have ignored it. You do not write 5 volumes against an idea that poses no threat. We'll come back to that word, threat, because it is the right one. Around the year 180, a bishop named Irenaeus of Lyon sat down to dismantle this reading of Genesis so completely that it would never rise again. He was the most formidable heresy hunter of the early church, and the work he produced carried a blunt title, Against Heresies. Much of it is aimed squarely at the Gnostics and at this exact reading of the garden. He names their teachers, he describes their cosmology, Sophia, the Demiurge, the spark in the flesh, and he attacks the serpent reading with a fury that tells you more than his arguments do. And Irenaeus was not the last. A generation later, in North Africa, Tertullian took up the same fight, attacking the same teachers, mocking the Gnostics for guarding their meaning behind locked doors and handing it only to those who had proven themselves. He could not abide a faith that kept secrets, or perhaps he understood exactly why it kept them, and that was the real problem. And nearly 2 centuries after that, a bishop named Epiphanius compiled an entire catalogue of forbidden sects, dozens of them, naming their texts, describing their readings of Genesis, and marking each one for destruction. 3 men, 3 centuries, one reading of one story that all of them circled, all of them named, and all of them wanted gone. So picture the choice that someone, somewhere, actually had to make. By the 4th century, the campaign was working. To be caught with these books was to be marked. The safe thing, the obvious thing, was to let them burn, hand them over, walk away clean. Someone did the opposite. Picture a monk moving at night, away from the lamps of the monastery. Under his arm, a stack of forbidden books, the serpent who frees, the mother who weeps, the blind god who rules. Everything the men in charge had ordered destroyed, and he is not carrying them to safety because there is no safety. He is carrying them to a hole in the ground at the base of a cliff. And he is not hiding one book, he is hiding 52 of them, gathered, chosen, sealed together inside a single clay jar, packed and buried as though they were being protected, not disposed of. And the questions that decision raises have never been fully put to rest. Why preserve the very texts you have been ordered to burn? Why take a risk that could cost you everything to save books you could simply have let vanish? Why bury 52 of them together as a whole library, as if every volume mattered and not just one? And what kind of person decides, in a moment like that something is too important to be allowed to disappear, even when no living soul will ever thank them for it? Because here is the part that lingers. Whoever buried that jar was not hiding these books from their own age. Their own age already knew them and was busy burning them. They were hiding them from time itself, sealing a message in the ground on the chance, on the hope that some future reader in some century they could not even imagine would one day dig it up and need to hear it. We do not know their name, we almost certainly never will, but we know what they did. They looked at a reading the entire weight of the church was trying to erase, and they decided it was worth saving, not for themselves, for whoever came next. And the gamble worked. The jar sat in the dark at the foot of that cliff for 1600 years. Empires rose and fell above it. The church it had been hidden from became the most powerful institution on earth, and slowly forgot these texts had ever existed at all. The reading was, for every practical purpose, erased, a voice silenced so completely that almost no one alive knew it had ever spoken. And then, in 1945, a farmer digging for fertilizer at the base of that same cliff near Nag Hammadi drove his mattock into the earth and struck something hard. A sealed clay jar. He broke it open hoping for gold. And here is what I cannot get past. The people who buried these books had no reason to believe anyone would ever find them again, not in 10 years, not in 100, not in 1,000. They hid them anyway. Think about what that means. What he found instead were the books a frightened hand had buried 16 centuries before. Think about how close it came to never happening at all. The campaign to destroy these texts had succeeded almost everywhere else. Nearly every other copy was ash. This one buried jar is very nearly all that survived, a few inches of soil, a single strike of a mattock, a moment of greed and curiosity, and a reading the church had spent 300 years putting into the ground came back up into the light. It does not feel like archaeology. It feels like the return of a voice that was never meant to be heard again, as if the one who buried that jar had been proven right, that someone, in a future they could never have pictured, would need exactly this and would come looking. We are that future. So stop and ask the question this whole story keeps circling back to. Because dangerous ideas leave fingerprints, you can tell what an institution fears by looking at what it spends centuries trying to erase. What was so dangerous about this reading? Not wrong. Dangerous. Plenty of ideas are simply wrong, and the church let most of them die quietly on their own. This one it hunted for 3 centuries and very nearly wiped from the face of the earth. Why? What is it about saying the serpent told the truth that an institution cannot survive? The answer has almost nothing to do with a snake or a garden or a piece of fruit. It comes down to one question, and one question only. Who holds the key to the door? Once you see what this reading does to that question, you understand exactly why 3 centuries of bishops could not let it stand. Here it is. The church these men were defending is built, foundation stone by foundation stone, on one particular reading of Genesis. Humanity disobeyed. Humanity fell. That fall is the wound, and the church is the hospital, and the sacraments are the medicine, and salvation is the cure that only the institution can dispense. Pull out the first stone, make the fall a liberation instead of a crime, make the serpent a rescuer instead of a deceiver, and the entire structure has nothing left to stand on. There is no original sin to inherit, there is no debt to repay. There is no need for the hospital, because the thing it called a disease was the cure all along. That is why they did not simply disagree. They could not afford to. If the Gnostics were right about the first 3 chapters of Genesis, then the church was not the remedy for the human condition. It was one more guard, standing at one more gate, telling you the door was locked, when the serpent had already shown you it never was. Ask yourself this: what would be at stake for an institution to spend 400 years making sure a single reading of a single story could never be spoken aloud? And here is where most channels covering this material go wrong, so let us not. It is tempting to flatten all of this into a slogan. The Old Testament God is evil, the serpent is good, end of story. But that is not what the historical Gnostics actually taught, and the truth is more interesting than the slogan. The real Gnostics were not simply Bible haters. They did not throw the Hebrew scriptures in the fire. They read them more closely than almost anyone, closely enough to find the seams. They believed the texts were a mixture, genuine glimpses of the higher reality, tangled together with the propaganda of the lower one, the voice of Sophia and the voice of the Demiurge, recorded side by side in the same book, and the whole spiritual task was learning to tell them apart. To read Genesis the way they read it was not to reject it, it was to read it as a contested document, partly a message from home, partly a story told by the warden, and that is exactly what makes this more unsettling, not less. Because it means the Gnostics were not asking you to burn the book, they were asking you to notice that 2 different beings are speaking in it, and that you have spent your whole life being told they were the same one. And if the figure of a divine feminine wisdom sounds like something the Gnostics invented out of thin air, here is the part that should give you pause. They did not invent her. She is already there, in the very scriptures the church kept. Open the book of Proverbs, the 8th chapter, and you will find wisdom speaking in the first person. A feminine figure, present before the world was made, standing beside the Creator as the foundations of the earth were laid. I was there, she says, when he set the heavens in place, rejoicing before him, the master craftsman at his side. The Hebrew tradition called her Chokhmah, the Greek-speaking world called her Sophia, a feminine principle of wisdom present at the creation, woven into the oldest layers of the tradition, and then, over centuries, quietly pushed to the margins. Abstracted into a poetic turn of phrase, her face slowly painted out. The Gnostics looked at that buried figure and asked a question the orthodox tradition could not afford to ask. What if she was not a metaphor? What if wisdom was a real power, present at the beginning, and the story of her grief, her mistake, and her long rescue of her trapped children was the true story hiding underneath the one you were handed? You do not have to believe a word of it to feel the weight of what they are pointing at. The feminine was there at the start, in their book and in ours. And somewhere along the way, in the version that survived, she went almost completely silent. And maybe that is the quiet challenge the Gnostics leave us with. They were not really asking you to take sides in a 2,000-year-old argument about a snake. They were teaching a way of listening. Two voices, they said, run through the story you were handed, and through the world you live in now. One voice tells you to stay small, stay obedient, stay asleep, and never ask what lies above the ceiling. The other tells you to open your eyes, even knowing what it will cost. The Gnostics believed you could learn to tell them apart, to notice in real time which voice is speaking, the warden or the one who came to wake you. And once you can hear the difference between those two voices, they warned, you can never again go back to hearing only one. So let us bring this all the way home, because there is a reason this old story still reaches people, and it is not really about snakes and gardens. The serpent's gift was not an apple, it was sight, the ability to look at the world you were handed and see that something about it does not add up. And anyone who has ever truly had that experience knows the secret cost of it that the story captures perfectly. Waking up is lonely. The moment you see past the surface of things, you also step slightly outside the room everyone else is still comfortably asleep in. You notice the contradiction in the verse, no one else stops to read. You hear the two different voices in the book, and you cannot stop hearing them. And you carry a kind of knowing you cannot easily hand to the people around you, because the gift, by its nature, is one that each person has to receive for themselves. If that feeling is familiar to you, if some part of you has always sensed that the official story, whatever official story shaped your life, did not quite line up with what you could see with your own eyes, then you already understand the serpent better than the people who spent centuries condemning it. The first humans were not punished for becoming wise, they were exiled for it. And the Gnostics would tell you that the loneliness you feel on the other side of waking up is not a sign that you got it wrong. It is the oldest evidence there is that you got it right. Before we go. So the cell door was never locked. Sophia handed us the key in the very first garden. But here is what they don't tell you. A prison without a lock still has guards. The Demiurge never ruled alone. According to the Apocryphon of John, he built 7 of them. 7 rulers, 7 Archons, each one stationed at a gate the soul must pass through on its way out. 7 checkpoints between you and the light. And here is the detail that stopped me cold. 2,000 years before a single Gnostic put pen to papyrus, the Egyptians had already mapped the same journey. 7 gates, 7 guardians, the exact same gauntlet, carved into the walls of the Book of the Dead. Either two civilizations, separated by oceans of time, imagined the identical prison by coincidence, or someone, somewhere, remembered something true. Have you ever stood at the edge of something you could not explain and felt, underneath the doubt, that some part of you already knew the way through? This is Weird World Files, where history meets the unexplained. Next time, we find out who Egypt remembered